Hello and welcome back to Geek and Speak, the Geek and Seek podcast. Today, we're diving into all of the new cards from the Duskmourn Commander Precons. If you want to know about our favorite cards from the actual set, you can check out last week's episode. We did a top 10 for that. But today, we're just going to do a quick review of all of the new cards from the Precons, see if these are archetype all-stars, or if maybe they have a little bit of playability in other kinds of decks. Joined with me today is our good old boy editor, Jason. How's it going, man?
Going okay. If you hear me sniffling at all, my allergies have been acting up, so, yeah. But we're having a good time. I'm excited for these cards. The main set is pretty good, and I think the Commander set's also pretty good.
Yes, and I'm right there with you with the allergies. Tis the season, my friend. And then we also have our good pal, Preston. How's it going, Preston?
Good. Excited to talk about some new cards. I like quite a few of these, so should be a good time.
Right on, yes. And I am your host, Morgan. I'm also pretty pumped about these. I actually got the Endless Punishment Precon and spent this afternoon figuring out what upgrades I was going to do for it, so I'm pretty excited to take that out for a spin. If you would like to support the show, you can do all the YouTube algorithm stuff, that being liking this video, leaving comments, sharing it with a friend, being subscribed if you're not already, and going back, checking out some of our other videos that you maybe haven't seen. We've been doing this for a while now, and then if you want to go the extra mile, you can head over to patreon.com/geekandseekyoutube. We don't have much going on over there, but we do have a special Patreon only episode of Commander gameplay coming out fairly soon. I'm making good progress on putting that one together. Yeah, let's go ahead and hop into this first precon. This is called Jump Scare. This is a Simic precon focused mostly on face down stuff. There's a new twist on face down in the set called Manifest Dread. Preston, do you want to start us off with the face commander of Jump Scare?
Yeah, I'll get us started. Alright, so first we have Zimone, Mystery Unraveler. 2, a green and a blue for a 3/3 legendary creature human wizard. Landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, Manifest Dread if this is the first time this ability has resolved this turn. Otherwise, you may turn a permanent you control face up.
This is kind of spicy. I mean, this is a landfall, like you're getting creatures out of it and or filling your graveyard. There's also combos with this. There's those cards that say like if a creature would die, it comes back as a forest. So if you have like some kind of sack outlet, then you can take your Manifest Dread cards and just do that. So that seems kind of spicy. But would you guys play these in any other land decks, or is this just like only if you're doing like face down shenanigans?
I think if your landfall deck is a bit creature heavy, this could be a good card if it's in the right colors, because you still will be able to play them, if they're creatures, just like manifest cards. So I think that it could find spots there, but I think that really this wants to be its own deck. And what's interesting to me about it is you since the commander has the ability to just turn permanents face up, you don't necessarily have to run all creatures. You could do enchantments or artifacts too, because you don't have to pay for those because the commander will just turn them face up. So I think that can really inspire a lot of unique deck building.
Well, and in the land decks, you're also just vomiting out so many lands that you could also, even if they're not all creatures that you can turn up later, you are just adding a lot of power to the board as well. To Manifest Dread, you look at the top 2 cards of your library, you put one of them on the battlefield face down as a 2/2, and the other into your graveyard. And then you can turn the face down card face up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature. So it works as manifest, except you're looking at 2 cards and one of them is going to go to your graveyard. So I actually think this is pretty spicy. Oh, also you can blink manifest cards. You can blink them and they'll turn them face up. So that's a way to get around having to pay their costs and stuff. There's a lot of tricky things you can do with them. They're pretty cool.
See, and my thing with it is just putting the cards into the graveyard is good in certain decks, like Muldroth is really going to like that, but these two colors just individually don't have a whole lot of recursion, so unless you're putting it into the right deck, where you're going to be able to pull those pieces back out of your graveyard, I really think that this is going to be better. Like, if you're adding it to the 99 of a deck, it's going to be better in, like, creature-heavy decks.
But if it's a land deck, you probably are playing like Ramanov Excavator or Crucible of Worlds. So then if you're pitching your lands, then you can just play the lands again from your graveyard. So I don't know.
See, but to me, that is more a strategy to run with this card as the commander.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you're just throwing it into a deck, that already has those pieces and is the right colors, then yeah, it'll work well. But I don't think that this necessarily is going to slot into a majority of landfall decks. I think, honestly, this is going to be the most fun you're going to have playing this is as a commander.
Yeah, because this is doing this typical thing Simic commanders do, giving you card advantage when you play lands, like that's the most Simic thing ever, but it's doing it in a genuinely different, interesting way. So I think this is really going to resonate with people, because it's not just draw a card when you play a land.
Kind of like surprisingly fair for blue and green.
No, there's combos with this. Yeah, there's combos with this.
You can still break it, but
it's good.
You gotta put a little bit.
Yeah, you have to put some work into it for sure.
It's probably the most fair, like, Simic landfall commander.
I would say it's more fair than like Tatiova or Icy or something. Like I would say it's probably more fair than one of those.
There might be some random one that's worse.
Yeah, Jason, do you want to read the backup commander?
So the backup commander for this deck is Cayenne, Corrupted Memory. It's 2, a green and a blue for a 2/2 legendary creature illusion. I don't know how many legendary creatures are illusions. I think that's really interesting. As long as Cayenne's power is even, you may cast non-creature spells as though they had flash. As long as Cayenne's power is odd, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Cayenne. I think that this is going to be like I'm very curious about how you build this deck, because to me it seems like you want to do like a pretty decent balance of creature and non-creature, but your non-creatures, you really want them to be like cantrip effects where you're going to be drawing a card at instant speed, and you can make Cayenne's power like a certain, odd or even, kind of at will, so that you're able to cast the certain spells that you need to cast at flash speed. That's the way that I initially look at this and see. I think you lean more cantrips for your non-creature spells. But I don't know. This seems a really fun and interesting commander to build.
It's really awkward as a backup commander in this deck. It is super cool, and I could see the deck being like super wonky and fun, but it makes no sense as a backup commander in this deck.
I mean, they do that a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of these backup commanders are cool, but they don't fit with the deck. This is just going to be one of those.
I think that that's fine, because it gives you a variety as far as deck building in the Precon. Like, the Precon's obviously going to be centered around Zamone, but adding this card in there, it almost makes it like, not 2 Precons, but you get 2 decks out of it almost, just because you get a commander that's so different.
They used to do that all the time in Precons, and now it's less common. To your comment that when you were reading the text box, Jason, this is only the 4th legendary illusion.
Ooh, interesting.
So illusion typal gang, I guess. Is there any merit to saying, like, I think we all agree that this would be a really sweet, spicy build around? Like, there's some really cool things you could do with it if you play with this as your commander. Is there any benefit to it that you could just play it in a generic Simic deck, just to give your stuff as an extra copy of like Vidalcan Aura or Leyline of Anticipation, or would you maybe play it in +1/+1 counter decks, or like, is there anywhere else that you would play this, or is it more or less just a build around?
I mean, that third ability alone can slot this into plenty of decks. Like a creature that's just getting bigger every time you draw a card. That's something Simic is not going to be turning its nose at anytime soon. Like, that's just what Simic does. So even if you ignore the first 2 lines of text, this is playable in plenty of Simic decks. But yeah, having that having that effect on a creature that's pretty spicy.
Yeah, if I were to ask you what two color combination is going to be the best at drawing cards, the answer is green and blue. I don't need to wait for an answer because that's what the answer is. So the fact that this is just whenever you draw a card, put a counter on it, that alone will find a spot into any Simic deck because Simic is going to be able to draw cards either with the cards that they're playing or with different combos that they have on the board from cards that they've played.
Yeah. So moving on to the new cards that are in the 99. First up, we have Curator Beastie. This is a 6-mana 6/6 beast, green creature with reach. Colorless creatures you control enter with 2 additional +1/+1 counters on them. And then when it enters or attacks, you manifest Dread, which we read Manifest Dread when we talked about Zimone. So obviously this works with any kind of your face down creatures, those like the morphs, the manifest, the whatnot. They all are colorless creatures. So and then those counters that you put on it will stay when you flip the creature face up. So it's just a way to make your creatures a little bit bigger. It makes your 2/2 face down creatures stand up a little bit better in combat. I would say that this probably doesn't really have any homes outside of face down matter kind of decks, because there's a couple others. We had one from Murders at Karlov Manor. There's also one from, I think, Commander 19 or something like that. But one other slight thing is that Tommy is making tweaks to his Simic deck so that it has an Eldrazi sub-theme. And it might be kind of interesting to have this in there just because it means his Eldrazi are even bigger. So, but yeah, what do you guys think about this one?
That was my first thought, was the fact that if you have a deck that has Eldrazi in it, or just a lot of like artifact creatures or colorless creatures, this can go into that, just because they're gonna enter with 2+1/+1 counters. It's not like they're getting +2/+2 until end of turn or something like that. The fact that you give them counters is pretty significant. So I do think that there's going to be homes for this in other decks that don't just care about manifesting Dread or manifest in general or face down creatures. You know, I think that there's definitely some homes for this card.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing a deck that cares about colorless creatures and you run green, I think you put this card in there. I think you just do. I think it's card advantage. It's making your creatures a little bigger. And it's not a bad body. A 6/6 with reach for 6 is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah. Yeah, triggers all your green card draw stuff for the big creatures and stuff, so that's helpful. Preston, what's next?
All right. Next up, we have Disorienting Choice. 3 and a green for a sorcery. For each opponent, choose up to 1 target artifact or enchantment that player controls. For each permanent chosen this way, its controller may exile it. Then, if one or more of the chosen permanents are still on the battlefield, you may search your library for up to that many land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. This is amazing. You either get to get a bunch of things off the battlefield or go get any lands. That's gross. That's pretty gross.
Yeah, I think that this is such a perfect card for Commander. Letting your opponents decide whether you either get rid of their thing or you get to ramp. I think in green, it might not be as bad. To let them get the ramp, or at least to deny them the ramp is not going to be as good because they'll have other ways to get it. But I think that I just like this card a lot because you could also use it politically, like, hey, I need to catch up so that I can deal with stuff that's happening, but this isn't going to affect you, so I think that there's a lot of fun things to do with this card in Commander, but just overall, 4 mana, maybe I'm just not as excited about this card as you guys are.
Well, so I was going to say that I actually think it's mid. Like it's baseline. Okay, so cards like this generally are mid because your opponent is always going to choose the thing that hurts them the least. If they're not as worried about you catching up a little bit, they'll just give you the land so that they can keep their artifact or enchantment. Or if that artifact and enchantment that they have is not very helpful anymore or has already gotten their value, then they'll just let you blow it up. Where it gets interesting is that if they do want to keep their artifact or enchantment and they know that you have scary lands, because this grabs any land. This could grab your Field of the Dead, your Maze of Ith, your Strip Mine. I mean, it can grab any land. So that's where it gets interesting. If you are just like playing like the Precon mana bases, this is like probably worse than mid. But if you actually are like spicing out your mana base and you have some really scary utility lands, then this gets kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that this card has the potential to put both Cabal Coffers and Urborg onto the battlefield,
At the same
I think
time,
that's good. So land decks really like this card, but outside of that, I think that, it's all right. It's fine.
Yeah. Jason, what's next?
All right, so next up we have the Giggling Skitter Spike. This is the little baby doll spider toy from Toy Story, the first one. So for 4 mana, it's an artifact creature toy. It's a 1/1 with indestructible. And this is whenever it attacks, blocks, or becomes the target of a spell, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. And then it has Monstrosity 5 for 5 generic mana. And Monstrosity just means if this creature isn't monstrous, it becomes monstrous, and you put 5+1/+1 counters on it. This 9 mana for a 5/5 indestructible, and I mean, whenever it attacks, you deal 6 damage to. I mean, there's potential. There's potential for sure, because in creature decks, you're probably playing Anthem effects. You're probably doing maybe a +1/+1 counters type theme where you're making your creatures really big. So every time that this attacks, you're gonna be able to deal a lot of damage to people. But what I think that this is going to be better for is it's going to be like, it's almost going to be, is this better than a Death Touch blocker? Because if you make this thing huge and somebody attacks you and you block with it,
if it's monstrous, I would say yes. But if it's not monstrous, I would say probably not. It depends on what it's going to combat against.
Well, I'm just trying to look at this card for everything that it can do, and when it's monstrous, I just think that no one's going to want to attack you unless they like have the win and they're attacking you with their whole board, and like this is only going to be able to block one thing, stuff like that. But I think that this is going to be a real good deterrent for people attacking you, but I just don't really care for it as much, because to me, you pay 9 mana to make this as threatening as possible, and it doesn't get you anywhere close to winning the game. So if you do them both on one turn, it's not really that good. And if you do them on like separate turns, like back-to-back turns, it's not any better. So I think that this card is fine. But it, maybe there's some interesting stuff that you can do with it if you can like generate infinite mana and cast like a single target spell infinite times, and because, it doesn't say when it becomes the target of a spell your opponents control. So you can target this thing, and then it's going to deal damage to each of your opponents. You give it Infect, that's going to be even better because the creature itself is what's dealing damage to each opponent. Funny. But I think at that point, you're just adding too much to make this card really good. So for 9 mana, I think that it's fine, and it's going to be a good way to deal damage in certain decks, but I think that this is another kind of mid card.
I think this card is really good if your deck already has a bunch of other ways to power up all your creatures. Like if you have mass +1/+1 counter strategies, like all
anthem
effects. So like if your deck already has those, this card's pretty good. Or if your deck's something like Ivy, like copying those, targeting all your creature stuff, something like that would be
target creature cantrippy kind of spells. Yeah.
Stuff like that. I think this card can be pretty strong, but otherwise, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, I
Like
think
it's
I
not
think
gonna
those
win
are
you the game on the
the
spot, but
the IV style decks I think are the best homes for this. Outside of that, I would say I do like these kind of cards. Like Stuffy Doll is a card that I really like, and this was worse
I
than Stuffy Doll,
this
I
this
think.
feels
But
like it's supposed to be a fairer version of Stuffy Doll.
yeah. So I could see it finding homes, but it definitely feels like a weaker version of that style of effect. So next up we have a room. So this is a new type of enchantment. So you can cast one side. There's basically two cards on the same card. You can cast one side, then it sits on the battlefield as that one side, and you can pay the mana of the other side to get the other half of the effect. So this one
At sorcery
is
speed.
yes, at sorcery speed.
Oh
So
dang, I skipped that card.
that's
Whoops.
okay. I got it. It's okay.
I'm
So this
sorry.
is experimental lab slash staff room. So experimental lab is for 3 and a green. Whenever you unlock this door, manifest dread, then put 2+1/+1 counters and a trample counter on that creature. And then the other half is staff room. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, turn that creature face up or put a +1/+1 counter on it. This seems incredibly inefficient. I would say that this probably doesn't even make the cut in most face down creature decks. It just seems incredibly inefficient.
What's crazy is that it would be so much better if instead of dealing combat damage to put counters, if it did it when it attacked. Like if it did it when it attacked and you got the buffs before damage was
that
dealt.
could be cool.
That would make this so much better, but not great.
If you're running like a super go wide green creature deck, you can play the staff room part, and it's okay, but you have to be making like 30 creatures in a turn, and even then, there's probably just better options.
Yeah, at that point you could just play like real anthems and stuff at 3 mana. So yeah, not much there. Preston, what do you got for the next one?
All right, next up we have Glitch Interpreter for 2 and a blue, 2/3 creature human wizard. When Glitch Interpreter enters, if you control no face down permanents, return it to its owner's hand and manifest dread. Whenever one or more colorless creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you draw a card. I think this is pretty decent for those, you know, like the manifesty type of decks, but also just the artifact and Eldrazi. If you have colored with those, this could be pretty good, but it's not world ending or anything, I don't think.
The only downside that I see, if it was just that second paragraph, I would be like, yo, this is kind of legit. But the first paragraph is kind of rough because if you don't have a face down permanent, it bounces back to your hand. So effectively, if you are playing it for the second paragraph, but it's not a face down matters deck of some kind, then you effectively have to pay 6 mana to get that second paragraph, and that seems overcosted. So it is a cool effect that I think some decks might want outside of face down decks, but very few. Like the big mana Simic deck that has the Eldrazi sub thing that Tommy has, maybe could play this, maybe, but it has just more efficient card draw and stuff at that point. So I think it's a slam dunk, like one of the best cards in the face down matter kind of decks. But outside of that, it seems too inefficient.
See, to me, this is one of the best cards in the Cayenne deck that you build if you decide to build that deck, because you have the ability to flash this in if what is it, Cayenne's power is odd, you get a flash in creatures, I think. So because you can do that and you can kind of be a little tricky with it, and your creatures are swinging in, you have a bunch of 2/2s that are just manifest creatures. Someone's like, oh, I'm not going to block your 2/2s, I'll take 4. Okay, before damage, flash this in. So I think that it's really good in that deck specifically. Outside of that, this deck is very meh. Because even in a colorless deck, you have to pay 6 mana for it. So you're likely just not going to have face down creatures, so you'll have to pay 6 mana for it. And at that point, you better have a lot of colorless creatures that are about to deal combat damage to somebody if you're paying 6 mana to draw some cards.
Well, it's only one card per person hit, which also tempers it a little bit.
Oh yeah.
So you want to hit every opponent.
Yeah, because it's one or more.
Yep. Yeah. Jason, what do we got next?
So next we have Shriekwood Devourer. It is 5 and 2 green for a 7/5 tree folk with trample, and this is whenever you attack with one or more creatures, untap up to X lands, where X is the greatest power among those creatures. Whoa! Whoa! Whoa!
This is cool.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! It's an attack trigger. It's an attack trigger. It's so good. By itself, it's gonna untap 7 of your lands. So like you play this, if you have haste enabler, you attack with it, boom, you untap 7 lands. Like it's not as good as like Sword of Feast and Famine, but holy smokes.
Even it doesn't have to attack. It's like you could play this, attack with another creature, and you still get the trigger, so it's even better. Or you play it in the Felix 5 boot stacks, and that's on combat damage. Never mind, that's not doubling attack triggers. But
I was just talking about this card by itself. Like this card by itself can untap the amount of lands that it needs to cast it. So if you did have a haste enabler, boom, right away. It doesn't even need to deal damage. It's if you have any type of like mana doubling going on, like you have like a Mirari's Wake or
Nykthos or Gaia's Cradle or Cabal Coffers.
Nissa Planeswalker.
Nissa Who Shakes the World.
Yeah, where you're doubling your green. What's the green enchantment? It's like also 7 mana, I think.
There's like a creature that's Nyx Bloom Ancient that like triples your mana. Yeah, I mean, it gets even more insane with cards like that. Yeah, but...
So you can really get gross with this because of this attack trigger. Like, this is... And here's the thing, green has some pretty decent ways to cheat creatures like this onto the battlefield. One thing that I'm really excited for is this is a tree folk. So I can technically throw it into my Finn deck and add it to my Ent army.
This is true. This card's kind of cracked.
I forget the name off the top of my head, but there's that one legendary creature who turns all of your creatures into forest.
Ashaya?
Ashaya, yeah.
You just swing something big. You untap all those things you just swung with.
Yeah. Gave him like pseudo vigilance. Yeah, there's also that one of the swords of X and Y. I think it's Feast and Famine. I might be wrong, but one of them. Yeah. I mean, and then it gets even more cracked with the crazy lands like Cabal Coffers and stuff. Like this card's awesome. I think if your deck consistently has big creatures and you consistently are going to have things to use that mana on, this should go in there. Like this card's awesome. And it's a 7 mana 7/5 with trample too. So it's just like it's got a cool factor in the art.
I don't know how much this card is going for, but I feel like it could almost be like a pseudo budget sort of Feast and Famine.
Pre-order pricing, I think, is what this price still is like $7 or $8, which is still
$5 for one version, $7 for the other.
Okay, yeah. So that's still cheaper than the sword. Yeah. Cool. I like that one. Next up is an enchantment. This is They Came from the Pipes. Spooky. When it enters, you manifest dread twice. So that's 4 different cards you're going to get to look at. So that's kind of relevant. Lets you dig pretty deep. And then whenever a face-down creature you control enters, you draw a card. So on its base, this is 5 mana, go 4 cards deep, fill up your graveyard a bit, add 2 bodies to the board, and then draw 2 more cards. So that's kind of cool, but then if you don't have any ways to flicker it, or if you're not playing a face-down matters deck, I don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that this card is very good outside of a face-down matters deck. If you're trying to find some budget options for your graveyard deck and you're trying to put some cards into your graveyard, maybe this is a card that you add in. Outside of that, I really just don't see the value in this card.
It's good for the deck it comes with, but it's not going to be put outside of it, really.
All right, and then Preston, lead us through the last card from this precon.
All right, last up we have Zemone's Hypothesis. 3 and 2 blue for an instant. You may put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, then choose odd or even. Return each creature with power of the chosen quality to its owner's hand. Is this good?
I can't figure that out. So there's always going to be... I kind of like these kind of board wipes because it's not a hard reset the way that like a Psych Rift is. And also well, I guess Cycrift is only your opponent, so that's probably a bad example. But you can always balance these modal board wipes in a way that it hurts your opponents more than it hurts you most of the time. Really make sure you're getting rid of some of the things. But the problem is that there's often going to be times where there's an odd mana value something that you want to get rid of, and then also a power, an odd and an even powered thing that you would like to get rid of both, and you can't. So I don't know.
If this was cheaper, I think I'd like it. But at 5,
Yeah,
I
5
just
mana
don't
is
know if
kind
I'd
of a
ever
lot.
run this.
Well, I think I know why it has to be 5. I think that this is a little bit too strong to be 3, and if it was 4, you couldn't play it if oh gosh, what's that Eldrazi that you can't cast even spells? You can't
Void
even.
Winnower.
Yeah, like if this was 4, you couldn't play it if Void Winnower was out, which I think really just destroys the value in this card. So I kind of feel like that's probably why they made it 3 or 5 mana, because it's just too strong to be 3, and it would be not nearly as powerful as it needs to be for the effect that it does at 4 mana, because Void Winnower you can't play it.
Maybe you could also just play it for value if you want to bounce your own things back to your hand on purpose. Get reuse, enter the battlefield, and it does add a +1/+1 counter to one of your creatures. So if you have any synergies with that, that's somewhat relevant as well. So I could see sometimes running it, but I definitely like if I'm trying to find removal options in blue, this is not towards the top of the list.
Only other thing
If I'm
about
playing
this
mono
card,
blue,
Well, no, even then there's other options.
I'd rather play like Evacuation.
Yeah, because at least that hits everything. Yeah. All right.
One thing about this card, is this the first Magic card with the word quality in its like actual ability text?
I would assume not. There's a lot of weird number related.
Especially for like old cards.
Yeah. All right. We have 3 more precons to go through, so we're gonna try to speed it up a little bit. Jason, what is the face commander for the next deck? This deck is Endless Punishment.
So the face commander for this deck is Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls. It is a 4/4 Elder Demon for 2, a black and a red, and it has flying and ward, pay 2 life. Whenever an opponent loses life for the first time during each of their turns, put a +1/+1 counter on Valgavoth, Harrower of Souls, and draw a card. This is just another really good Rakdos, I'm going to do some damage to you so I can get some value in one way or the other type of deck. I think that it's really, really, really strong because it's 4 mana flying, 4/4 with ward, pay 2 life. That alone is really, really good. And it has a pretty relevant ability in these 2 specific colors and for the type of decks that normally get built in these colors. I think that this is really cool. I don't think it's as powerful as, the mono black Valgavoth, but this card is pretty sweet.
I'm so excited to play this deck. I am so excited to play this deck. Because it's kind of burny. You're nicking away at all your opponents while at the same time ending up with this giant flyer in the air that people have to answer. So I dig it. I'm here for it.
if you build this as the second or third most powerful version of it, I love this commander deck. If you build the strongest version of this deck, I never want to play against it.
So what would be the line? Like what is the line in which it's gone too far?
Well, what are the 2 creatures? When you draw a card, you lose life.
Oh, like Orcish Bowmaster and Shieldred, like those kind of cards.
And now you're playing red, so you can run real effects. That is the strongest version of this deck. I think that's miserable. If you tone it down to like the red cards, where if someone plays a land, they lose life, that's fun. I think that's a strong but much more fair version. So if you do that, I think this can be a really fun deck, even to play against. I don't think it's too bad. But if you build the very strongest version, I think this is miserable.
I just finished all the upgrades for this precon that I want to do. I did not add any wheels, but I did add the new card, the one we talked about last week, the red creature that kind of pings people when they draw cards. I did decide I want to put that in here, but that between that and against Shield with the Apocalypse and Orcish Bowmasters, I feel like that was the more fair option.
A pretty tame choice, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you, especially putting it in there without the wheels, yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah. And then the backup commander, I think, is just as cool. Probably requires a little bit of a different build, but I think it's just as cool. This is the Lord of Pain for 3 black-red. 5/5 human assassin. I'm not sure how that's a human, but it has menace. Your opponents can't gain life. Oh, that's good. That's good. We Preston loves to hear it. And then whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, choose another target player, and then the Lord of Pain deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to the chosen player. So it's funny, because you could try politicking your way to be like, hey, you know what? Because it only is on the first spell each turn. So, like, if you're smart, you'll just, like, your first spell will always be, like, the smaller spell, right? So that way it's not as brutal. But, like, if you want to get political with it, you could be like, hey, cast Galta, and I'll throw 12 at that guy's face. You know, like, it's funny. It's cool. It's not, like, oppressively strong, but it's going to throw a lot of damage. It's going to be funny.
I think of one specific instance where this card is just so amazingly good. You're in that same situation, right? Where you're like, hey, cast your Galta and I'll deal 12 to that guy's face. And so they cast their Galta and they're like, all right, with my commander's trigger on the stack, I'm going to play Tainted Strike. Give my commander Infect.
That's messed up. Yeah,
take 12 to the face.
That guy. Yeah.
Die. Yeah, I think that's a really, really cool situation. I mean, if you're able to give this guy Infect, you're going to be able to take people out pretty quickly. Or at the very least, force them to stop casting their big spells until this gets taken care of.
And then Preston's favorite part is that players can't gain life.
Of course, it's Preston's favorite part.
Why'd they have to put that on there? Why'd they have to do that?
Because they understand that people like you exist.
Because life gain
700 life.
Life gain is stacks against burn decks, okay? That's why. But Preston, what is the first 99 card from this deck?
All right, first up we have Gleeful Arsonist for 2 and a red, Human Wizard 1/2. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, Gleeful Arsonist deals damage equal to its power to that player, and it has Undying. When this creature dies, if it had no +1/+1 counters on it, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter. This seems pretty decent. You know, it's not the strongest burn creature that's ever been printed, but I can see people putting in some work with it.
It's really good in the decks that care about dealing the incremental damage, because unless someone's like playing a Spell Slinger or a Storm deck or something like this, it's not reliably going to be dealing that much damage. But if you just care about like, it just needs to trigger like once and I feel good, you know, like with Valvagath, where's the V and the G? Anyways, him or Obnixilis from Aftermath. You know, those kind of commanders that care about the small incremental pings. Or maybe if you're just playing burn, like the Oger Axonil, that it rounds it up to 4 damage instead, or Torbrand, which is doubling the damage or whatever the hell. So, yeah, I mean, it seems okay.
If you can make it bigger without counters.
Yeah.
It's kind of like reverse Gutter Snipe if you think about it.
Yeah. Okay, Jason, what's the next card?
So next up, we have Star Athlete. It is a 3/2 human warrior for 1 and 2 red. It has menace, and it says whenever Star Athlete attacks, choose up to 1 target non-land permanent. Its controller may sacrifice it. If they don't, Star Athlete deals 5 damage to that player. And then it has Blitz, and its Blitz cost is 3 and 1 red. Just as a reminder, Blitz just means you cast it, it gains haste. When it dies, you draw a card, and you have to sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So you can blitz it out, kind of turn it into a cantrip, and you're going to be able to attack somebody and deal damage to them potentially. If you know, and you also, it can also be a removal spell at 4 mana for that. You could just be like, target this and you're gonna take 5 damage, and somebody's like, well, I don't want to take 5, so I'll just sacrifice this. Although most of the time, if they're targeting your like most powerful, dangerous, threatening non-land permanent on your board, you're probably just going to take 5 and leave it alone. Like, 5 isn't that much, so I don't think that this card is necessarily a really great removal spell. But it's fine. I think you play it for 3 mana most of the time anyways.
So, okay, hear me out. This is like Dream World, all right? I'm going to manifest this.
Are you going to manifest Dread?
No, this isn't the manifest deck, Morgan. That's the other
okay.
one.
The dream scenario with this card is it's late game, so everyone's been doing their thing, right? Like life totals are getting a little lower. There's some dangerous permanents on the battlefield, but someone just cracked off a board wipe, so the coast is clear, but there's still like artifacts and enchantments and whatnot. You blitz this sucker in, and now that person really has to think hard on whether or not they're going to take the 5 or not. Because you're right, most of the time they'll just take the 5, but otherwise this is unconditional removal in red. So if you get them low enough that they have to just let the permanent go, then that's good. But I think outside of that, this card is like completely not good unless you want to blitz it in like a sacrifice deck. Like it is red, so it can go in like Corvold decks or any kind. A lot of sacrifice decks are red. So if you want it for the blitz cost, that's kind of cool. But otherwise, I think it's pretty crappy outside of the late game.
I wouldn't say it's not good.
With this card. The dream with this card is clone decks. Because then it's whatever their best permanent is. Do they want 15 life to go away for that one permanent? That's how you make this card good.
I guess that is funnier with like damage doublers with like Fiery Emancipation or whatever. And that's
listen, I don't think
mean having multiple copies.
Yeah.
Make clones of it.
I don't think that this is necessarily bad. Because you got to think of it this way. It's still 3 mana for a 3/2 with Menace that every time it attacks, it has the potential to either get rid of a non-land permanent or deal 5 damage to a player. So, I think that it being 3 mana, in mono red decks, this is not going to be a do-nothing creature. If it had Menace and Haste, that would make it even better, but it doesn't, so, whatever. But
yeah.
I don't think
Blitz.
It's bad.
It's got Blitz. That's kind of Haste.
Yeah, but you have to sacrifice it. Corvold loves this card.
And it cantrips.
This card should not be a rare.
Oh, definitely.
It should be an uncommon.
So next up is a pretty fun one. This is Barb Flare Gremlin, which is for 3 and a red, a 3/2 Gremlin with first strike and haste. And whenever a player taps a land for mana, if it is tapped, that player adds 1 mana of any type that land produced. Then that land deals 1 damage to that player. I feel a sneeze coming.
Bless you.
That was Jason's fault.
It was Steven's fault, actually.
Yeah. So on one hand, I like this card because it's so on one hand, I like that because it has haste, you theoretically could get in and tap it right away. But it is also ramping your opponents, and 1 damage is not much. So outside of the decks that specifically want to be dealing the incremental damage here and there, actually, I don't know. Actually, maybe it is a lot of damage because if they're going to cast a big spell, I don't know. What do you guys think about this one? I could see it either way. I could see this being like a severe underperformer because it also ramps your opponents. It fixes your opponents.
Here's the thing. I think that this card is going to be perfect into like a Boros deck that has life gain in it because you're going to be able to gain that life back. But that 1 damage per land, that's going to be incredible because you're incentivizing your opponents, to play their really big stuff because not incentive. You're enabling your opponents to play really big stuff because you're doubling their mana. But by playing their really big stuff, it's going to punish them. And I think that one of the advantages of this card is it looks so underwhelming that it's just going to sit on the table for a few rotations and end up dealing a ton of damage to every player before somebody realizes that card's a problem. We need to get rid of it.
Well, it is all. You did have a good point that it does deal damage to you as well. But the way around that is you could play all your stuff first, your first main phase, and then go to combat, get it tapped down, and then it won't be dealing the damage to you.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you
that's
won't get
true.
the extra
So
mana.
it's a bit of a trade-off. Yeah.
At that point, you're just preventing yourself from doubling up on mana and just letting your opponents double up on mana while pinging them for some damage. And I think that really just becomes more valuable if you're able to double some of your mana the turn that you play this card. Because I mean, and let's think about it this way: even if you went last, everyone else at the table has 4 lands already. You played your 4th land. You played this. You attack with it. Everybody else goes to their turns. And let's say they all play a land for turn, and they tap all 5 of their lands to play a spell. You just dealt 15 damage across the table. And that was just one turn rotation. If it happens again, and everybody plays another land, and then they tap all 6 of their lands, you've now dealt 33 damage across the table. I just think that there's a lot of potential for this card, and I think it's one of those cards that's going to go under the radar, and it's going to end up dealing a lot of damage over the course of a game.
Yeah, I could see that. Preston, what's next?
Next up, we have Persistent Constrictor. 4 and a black for a creature, zombie snake 5/3. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, they lose 1 life, and you put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature they control, and it also has Persist, which is if it dies, return it to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter if it didn't have any. This is rude.
This is an all-star with the face commander because it's a guaranteed trigger for the commander. But even then, I think this probably has some homes in other decks. You could play this in like proliferate style decks. That way you could just add the 1/1/-1 counter to something, even if it's not enough to kill it. And you can get there a lot faster because you're able to proliferate. So is that worth it as a 5-mana 5/3? I don't know, but it might be. But it's an all-star with this face commander, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely good with the face commander. I think it'll be good in other Rakdos decks that care about like causing your opponents to lose life. But I 5 mana, a 5/3. I just don't see it. It's great with this deck, but outside of that, I just don't think that it's a really highly valuable card.
I like it in Golgari because you can put your +1/+1 counters on it, and then it just never dies.
Yeah, it's true. It would balance out with the persist. Yeah. I could see it having other homes. But Jason, what's next?
So next we have Suspended Sentence. For 3 and a black, it's an instant that says destroy target creature an opponent controls. That player loses 3 life, exile Suspended Sentence with 3 time counters on it. And then it has suspend 3 for 1 and a black, meaning that you can pay 1 and a black and exile it with 3 time counters on it, and then after the last time counter is removed, you get to play it. The fact that you can play this card and then you can play it again after 3 more turns, that's really, really cool. I think that at 4 mana to do that, though, I mean, it's valuable because you essentially just pay 2 mana per one that you cast. But the fact that you have to stretch that out over now 4 turns, because after you play it, it's going to do its thing, and then it's going to get 3 time counters. So you have that turn and then 3 more turns until you actually can play it again. I don't know that this is going to be like an auto-include targeted removal, because it is only targeting a creature. But maybe I'm just undervaluing this card. I don't know.
I mean, it stays around for the rest of the game if it's going to be a long game. Because every time you cast it, it'll go back into the exile and you do it again in 3 turns.
Was any of the Doctor Who stuff that cared about suspend counters black? I know that there was the Grixis Precon, but that one was not really about suspend or whatnot. Because I was thinking, if you can control how quickly those time counters are getting removed, then this is pretty cool. But what's sad is that Otherwise, if you don't have control over when this is going off, like as those time counters are kicking off and it goes onto the stack, then you might be in a position where there's not a good target and you have to target something that you wouldn't necessarily care to waste a spell on, which kind of feels like a waste. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. If you hit one of your opponent's things, they're still losing that creature and losing 3 lives, so it's not like the end of the world, but there's theoretically better uses of that card in your 99. But even worse is that if it's after a board wipe or something and this goes off and there's no legal targets for it, it just goes to the graveyard.
Well, no, it stays in exile because you can't cast it.
Oh, well, that's even worse.
No, wouldn't it just fizzle because it doesn't have a legal target?
Well, no, you have to have a target to cast it in the first place.
Yep. Yeah, it's even worse.
It just stays in exile.
Yeah, it seems sus. I mean, I could see specific situations to play, but I think if you want just targeted creature removal, most decks have better options most of the time.
Yeah, play that mono white one that destroys a creature and then they manifest dread for 1 white mana.
That one's cool. That one's cool.
From the main set. That card's nuts.
So next up, we have Sadistic Shell Game. This is another one that I'm curious to see what you guys think about. This is for 4 and a black, a sorcery. Starting with the next opponent in turn order, each player chooses a creature that you don't control, destroy the chosen creature. So, assuming all 4 players are still alive, this means for 5 mana, you destroy 4 creatures that are not yours. It's not very efficient, but there's politicking involved, and that's why I'm curious. Because the bad side of the politicking is that if you're the arch enemy, they'll all be like, okay, I'll pick your thing that you don't care if it dies, and we'll team up on him and get him. And then that's a really bad use of your 5 mana. But if you're not the arch enemy, and someone else is, then you could have like 3 of that player's stuff hit, right? And then that's like a decent use of your 5 mana. So the political aspect of it makes me really curious about if this card is good or not.
I don't know. I don't really care about that. It's 5 mana, get rid of 5 or it's 5 mana, get rid of 4 creatures. That's good. I don't care. I don't care. And the thing about it is, like, here's something that you're not considering. This gets around Shroud and Hexproof because you're not targeting anything. The players are just choosing the creatures and they get destroyed. So it gets around Hexproof and Shroud.
It's such a dumb rule, but it's true.
5 mana, destroy 4 creatures, get around Shroud and Hexproof. I think this card is sweet.
You are in the mana spot where at this point you could just cast a board wipe, but a lot of the times I don't want a board wipe. I just want to get rid of a few problematic things while I get to keep my stuff and keep progressing the game. So it is in the mana value where maybe you would rather just Wrath, but sometimes you would rather not Wrath. So
I think that this card is really good, and I think that if it was an instant instead of a sorcery, they'd probably make it a mythic rare.
I will say, if you know your deck's going to be the arch enemy deck, don't play this for sure. Because then they're all just going to choose the same one creature. And like they might choose a creature that is indestructible.
Yeah, true. That's true.
Because nothing stops them from all choosing the same creature. Because you all choose before it resolves. So they can all just choose the same thing.
That's true.
Yeah. If your opponents want to, you also get to choose. So you're at least going to destroy 2 things.
Yeah. Unless they choose something indestructible, is what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah.
Then you're paying 5 to get rid of one thing, and that doesn't feel good.
But most of the time, it's not going to play out that way.
All right. We got 2 more cards left in this Precon. Preston, what's the next one?
All right, next up we have Seance Board. For 2, it's an artifact with Morbid. At the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, you put a soul counter on Seance Board, and then you can tap it at X mana of any one color, where X is the number of soul counters on Seance Board. Spend this mana only to cast instant, sorcery, demon, and spirit spells.
I don't think this is good. Because by itself, it doesn't even tap for any mana. You have to play this, then something has to die, then it can tap for mana, but it can only tap for certain things. So even if you were a demon or spirit deck that had a decent amount of instants and sorceries in it, I still don't think this is very good.
Yeah, I feel like you have to play monocolor. Like, I don't even think you care about the demon spirits. I think maybe an instant and sorcery deck that's monocolor cares about this. Maybe.
Well, then you have to decide, but then you have to be careful that you can make sure that you can actually turn on the morbid and actually put counters on this thing. So the dream world is that you're some kind of aristocrat style deck where things are dying semi often, and then you can end up with several counters on this thing, and then this thing could tap for a lot of mana. But I don't think that's easy to do, especially in the kind of decks that it's for. Well, yeah, I guess that's true.
I think that you could run it in certain 2-color decks, maybe because I don't know, maybe you have ways to add a lot of mana of one color, and then this can add a lot of mana of another color. Just not great. I think that if you're, playing cheap artifacts, maybe you run this. But, I'm not putting this in Joyra just because it's a 2-mana artifact.
Jason,
you can
we
pair
got
it with that one creature where you can have any number and then sacrifice like 5 of them to go get a demon. Could be fun in that deck.
Mm-hmm. Jason, we got one more card in this precon. What do we got here?
All right, so last one in this precon is another room. The one side is Spiked Corridor for 3 and a red, and it says when you unlock this door, create 3 1/1 red devil creature tokens with when this creature dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. Then the other side is Torture Pit for also 3 and a red, and it says if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. Just another, do more damage spell, really good for this commander deck. In this precon, it's going to be really nice. It even is going to be, I think, a good card in the backup commander for this deck. But I just think that for 4 mana, if you're running a lot of non-creature spells, or non-creature spells where you're playing them and it's like pinging your opponents for damage. If you have creatures that are pinging your opponents for damage, without attacking, this is going to be fine. But I just prefer, the red enchantments that if a source you control would deal damage to an opponent, not just combat damage or non-combat damage.
I do think that this is probably a new auto-includey card in the burn style decks, the group slug kind of decks, because the Torture Pit specifically, that +2 damage instead is going to stack up because you're realistically triggering that multiple times a turn. So it's kind of like the Torbrand thing where it doesn't seem like that much, but it adds up super fast. So
I guess that's fair. Gutter Snipe dealing 4 damage to everybody when you cast something. That does sound pretty nice.
I'm excited to put this in my Judith deck.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no.
That'll be so nice. All right, since we are going quite a bit longer than we had hoped, we're going to go ahead and end this video here. We will be back either tomorrow or the next day with another video for a part 2 of this to talk about the other precon. So if you're new, make sure you subscribe so you see that video when it comes out, or if it's already out, I'll have it linked here at the end of the video. We will see you guys then. Bye.